Welcome to the
Awesome.
Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz. If you're anything like me, or a lot of the people I know, you have at times in your life struggled with indecision. I've often wondered what causes this and what are the consequences. And while I'm pretty sure I know most of it, I recently read an article that inspired me to have the author of the article on to have a discussion with us about the topic. So I invited her. She's a clinical social worker and a part time faculty member at the Boston College School of Social Work. And she's also the author of a very interesting titled book called Pork Belly Tacos with a Side of Anxiety: My Journey Through Depression, Bulimia, and Addiction. Yvonne Castaneda. Did I pronounce that
Yeah,
right? Okay,
you got
good.
it.
All right, perfect. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So while I think most people are generally aware of what indecision is, if you had to describe it with an elevator pitch, a brief explanation, how would you describe indecision?
I would describe indecision as a manifestation of fear at the end of the
Oh,
day. It's stemming from fear. I think when we're stuck in the middle or we're trying to make a decision and feeling like we just can't make the decision, it's coming from a place of uncertainty and fear associated with that. Is there's as you read the article, or as I put in the article, there's different things that we might be afraid of. So I think at the end of the day, the root or the core of indecision is fear.
now can a person be decisive in some areas of life, like for instance, in their professional life or dealing with business associates, but yet be indecisive in other areas like their personal relationships or social situations?
Sure, sure. I mean, I think that's a great question. Because as a therapist, I've seen both. Like I've seen individuals who say in their professional lives, it's very easy for them to make decisions. They're not at all concerned about it. I think it's just a little more black and white with the decision making. And yet in the social setting, struggle a great deal. And honestly, Michael, and of course, then there's situations where people just struggle, period, to make decisions. There's always a lot of thinking, a lot of overthinking, a lot of analyzing, a lot of trying to figure out what the best decision is, but to a point where it paralyzes the person and they can't make a decision at all.
So you mentioned fear as being sort of the root of indecision. What type of fears influence a person's
Mm,
unwillingness to commit to make a decision?
yeah. Um, I don't know that it's that someone is not willing or like they're unwilling. I think it's a little bit deeper than that. I'll give you an example. I work best with examples. It's like my husband's a really great example, and actually he inspired the article. I was thinking about some of the challenges that he's had in the past, and I thought, maybe there's space for an article like this. So like every year, say we would host Christmas with his family and close friends, but mostly with his family. And he comes from a Latino family, much like myself. I come from a Latino family. And honest to God, we would go to the grocery store, right? And it would start with, I don't know what to make, right? And mind you, feeding like 6 people, 6 to 8 people max, right? So you would think that's kind of easy. And I would watch him, like we'd be in aisles, at the grocery store, and he would literally be standing there paralyzed, not able to make a choice on anything. And we would talk about it. And not that he would openly share, listen, it's because I'm afraid of this or that. But it was in conversations afterward that it would come to him, just, I don't want to disappoint. I want everybody to love, what we've put together. And I'm just afraid that they'll be disappointed, and that fear of disappointing family members or friends or whatever is the thing that would then paralyze them into making a decision. And so you would overthink a great deal. Like, if I make turkey, are they going to like it? If I make lechon, like pork, are they going to like it? What if I make this and they don't like it? So there was a lot of like, what if, and asking himself questions that we can't answer because we don't live in other people's brains. So it's just like a lot of emphasis on like making sure that other people are happy. So that's one fear. It's like the fear of disappointing. I think another fear obviously is just, and I guess it goes along with disappointment. It's what are they going to think? What are people going to think if I do this? And what if I choose this path? Whether it's, what to cook for dinner or what career path to take. Some people might struggle with making a choice on a particular career path simply because they're concerned about what this invisible audience out there is going to think. And I think sometimes we don't, and I say we because I was definitely part of that. I mean, I definitely struggled with that. It's just this overwhelming concern for this invisible audience that for some of us we're taught to always consider. So those are, I think, two of the biggest fears that I have seen when it comes to like decision paralysis. And then just like not wanting to make a mistake or this idea that something could be a mistake, so that too. And there's just so much behind those fears.
You actually touched on two areas that I was thinking about. I have two friends
Hmm.
that have struggled with indecision. One, not so much any longer. One, still very much so. One is a man and the other is a woman.
Okay.
And my male friend, he has struggled with it because of perfectionism.
Okay.
Everything has, so when he's working on a task, he has struggled in his life to pull the trigger and say, okay, it's done
Right.
because it has to be perfect. She, on the other hand, is more of a people pleaser. It's,
Mm.
well, what is this friend going to think if I don't go there, or if I
Mm.
go here, then this one's going to get mad at me. And I went shopping with her. She was buying a Christmas gift for a friend of hers.
Oh
And
boy.
and they're talking, well, would
Oh
he
boy.
like this? Would he like that? Maybe he won't. And I'm just like, you have no idea because you're not in his head. Just pick
Right.
something. And then they went to the sales guy and they asked him, she and her mother, because her mother's very indecisive also. They go to the sales guy. Do you think this guy is going to like this? And I'm just like, the guy doesn't know him. How the hell does he know what he's going to like? Just pick something and let's go. But it
Yeah.
seemed to me that behind the sort of people pleasing and the perfectionism lies a very shaky sense of self-esteem. It's as my self-worth, or my opinion of myself is dependent on what other people are going to think, whether it's they're going to think I'm rude for not showing up, or I'm a poor gift getter, or I don't do a good enough job at my tasks. It's comes back to that. To me, I think is the root of that fear you talk about, is an insecure sense of self, or I'd like to say low self-esteem, but it's probably a unstable self-esteem would probably be the better way to put it. Does that ring true to you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I love the way you framed it too. It's like a lot of us. It's not just a few, a select few. I think a lot of us, right? For whatever reason, we depend on other people for our sense of self. We're codependent on different people, on different things. Like we need other people to validate us. We need their approval. We need them to tell us that we're good people, and that's, I don't know, for me it's like slavery. You're stuck, right? You can't break free. You're never free. You're always at the mercy of what other people are thinking of you. But in reality, you never know. You just don't know what people are thinking. And it really doesn't matter at the end of
No.
the day. But how many times have you said this to your friend, right? Like it doesn't matter. It's the thought that
Thousands.
counts. Oh my
Thousands.
God, I go through this every
Yeah.
Christmas with my husband. Same. And with his family, I've seen this with his siblings. It's the no, I can't get him that because then he's gonna think X, Y, and Z. And he's gonna think, that I don't care about him or that I didn't put any thought into the gift. I mean, there's just like so much goes into that. But at the end of the day, you're right. It's maybe the person doesn't have a strong foundation themselves. maybe not a great deal of self-esteem, or there's a very loose sense of self, and there's a lack of confidence.
It's learning this lesson that what goes on in other people's heads has zero
Mhm.
impact on my life. It has been such a strong lesson to learn. And people sometimes conflate that with, well, if your boss thinks you're lazy, he'll fire you. But that's existential. That has to do with actual effects on my life. Like
Sure.
that's what he's going to do to me. But when it's just a person's thoughts, those thoughts mean nothing.
Mm.
It's going on. It's like, how many thoughts do I have about other people as I walk by that don't affect them in any way? In this issue you talk about, one issue that's clear to me when it comes to worrying about what people think. When I was young, in my teens, I had a very difficult time talking to girls, so I would drink alcohol. It gave me confidence to go talk. Hey, whatever, and now that I'm older and I realize, like, what the hell do I care? If I go say hi to some woman and whatever she says, who gives a damn? Like, what's she gonna do? I hate you. Get away from me. You're creepy. Okay, I'm creepy. What the hell do I? Her opinion doesn't matter in that sense. So why not just talk to people? Say hello. What's the worst that can happen? But I'd imagine that's an area where a lot of people are indecisive. How many times have I seen it in TV where a guy is out somewhere or a girl's out somewhere and she wants to say hi to the guy, but oh no, maybe he won't like me. Who cares? Just go say hello, right? But you write that a lot of this has its roots in our early experience as children. I'd like to
Sure.
hear you elaborate on that. How is that? Why is that? And what kind of
Oh.
childhood experience would lead to
Hmm.
this type of dynamic?
That's a great question, Michael. Now look, I'm half Cuban, half Mexican. Okay. And I'm speaking from a place of, and I'm gonna give you an example of this that is prevalent in our culture. But I know that it's not unique to our culture, but it's prevalent in my family system. But like I remember being a little kid. I was about 5 years old, and I was playing on the living room floor with my toys, and the doorbell rang, and my mom came running out of wherever the heck she was. She came running over to me, and she leaned over and she's like, Yvonne, tell Florita that I'm not home and that I'll call her later. And I remember standing there having like an epic moral dilemma, because I was being raised in the Catholic Church and I was being told repeatedly not to lie. And my mother was actively telling me to lie. And I challenged her. I said, but mommy, that's not true. You're here. She's like, no, 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 just do what I say. And she ran off. So I went and I opened the door, right? And Florita standing there. And she's like, hi, mija, tell your mother that I want to talk to her. Andale. And I stood there and I looked at her and I said, my mom says that she's not home and that she'll call you later. And then I slammed the door. My mother comes running out with a chancleta, with a sandal. I was like, oh boy, here it comes. She was like, why did you say that to her? And I said, but I told her what you told me to tell her. She's like, válgame Dios, no, that's not. So she was so upset. But you know what, Michael? You know what I remember about that is that when she walked away, and all she could say, like for the rest of that day, telling my father the story, was, what is she gonna think? And I have to tell you that what is she gonna think? What will they think? What are they gonna say? I heard that all throughout my life. So it wasn't just one incident. It was over, and it was like a repeated statement that I heard over and over. And it was because my mom herself was terrified. My mom herself is insecure and worried about what other people might think. And there's grace for that. I understand. It doesn't make her a criminal. It's just like that's just how she was. And so I think that for us as kids, we don't know when we're 5 years old that this is going to have a lasting impression on us, but it does, right? Because I know that what I grew up believing and what I believed from all of that for a long time was that perceptions have a great deal of power, regardless of their distance from the truth. And so from this was born, and of course it was exacerbated throughout the years in many different ways, but I grew up with this idea that I always had to put other people's perceptions, thoughts, feelings ahead of everything else. And you know what's sad about that is that in our culture, many times, that is often seen as like, oh, you're a good person, right? Because you care for others. You put other people first before yourself. No, no, you're just a people pleaser. You're just pleasing people because it means something about you. If they don't like you, then it means something. You put all of your self-worth in other people's pockets and they get to decide. But I didn't know that. I didn't know that that's what happened. It took me, like you, years, years of addiction, of, lots of mental health issues that I obviously had to work through myself. But it was when I look back on my early childhood experiences and just not what I was taught, but what I learned just from observing the adults in my life and taking cues from them about what is normal. So I thought that it was normal to always be worried about what other people would think. So it's catastrophic.
You just took me in a direction I didn't know that I was going to go. So forgive me if you're not ready for it. But what you're talking about ultimately is in our culture is an altruistic ethic, that the idea that we have to put other people ahead of ourselves, that it's important that we sacrifice our own happiness, whatever, for the sake of other people. And this is another lesson that I've learned, is that, wait a second, if you're telling me that all people are valuable and that's why I need to sacrifice myself to make other people happy, well, why not just make myself happy? Am I not part of the human species? Do I
Sure.
not deserve the happiness also? What makes the other so much more worthy? I mean, as you know, looking through my story, I did a significant amount of time in prison, and I once had a cellmate, and he would tell people, "It's not about you; it's about other people." This was his counsel, and
Hmm.
then he would say, and I'm just thinking to myself, there's contradiction going on here, because everybody you talk to, you tell it's about other people.
Right.
But for me, it's about that person. Why don't we all just take care of ourselves and and put myself first? Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that I disregard the rights of others, or the happiness of other people, but just look out for my own happiness first. And then I'm in a much better position to be a good person, to be kind to other people. A friend of
Absolutely.
mine who is a talk show host, he told me that the way people talk to other people often is the way they talk to themselves.
Hmm.
So if you're cruel to other people, if you're mean to other people, he said, imagine what that person is saying to themselves.
Mm.
And it makes sense that it's so inverted, culturally, on how we should behave in the role of kindness to ourselves and pursuing our own interest. And that is, like you said, when you're learning that from a little kid, it's like always put everybody else first. And then it makes sense that you become obsessed with what they're thinking. They're so important. They're the all important they, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think the way that it translates, I know for me, the way that it translated was like, if I did anything for myself and I prioritized my happiness and my contentment, then it felt selfish. Like it felt like I was being selfish. Like I shouldn't do that. And believe me, man, I had struggled with that for the longest time. And I think what I've learned, not necessarily like as a therapist, but just as a human who's evolving, like all of us are evolving. And I think the danger is making meaning of our interactions. Like if I put somebody else ahead of me, it means this about me. It means that I'm a good person. It means that I'm altruistic. If I prioritize myself, then it means I'm selfish. And like we make meaning of things that really we shouldn't be making meaning of. I agree with you. I mean, I think, is it important to care about other people? Well, of course. Absolutely. We do want to care about other people. Are there scenarios in which we might do something for someone, even and especially if it's inconvenient for us at any given time? Sure, there are scenarios for that. But I think if we are taught, like at an early age, to just focus on ourselves, our own actions, and what we believe to be true for ourselves, what we believe to be good, right? And we focus on building up our own sense of self, and we're confident and we trust ourselves and we care about ourselves and we love who we are. And I think when we then help other people, there's no relationship with that help. There's no, I'm helping you, so it means this. And there's no concern for what the other person is going to think. There's never a fear that the other person is going to regard us in a negative light. And it goes beyond, it doesn't mean that we walk around saying, like, well, I don't care what other people think. It takes it to another level. It's like, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what other people think at the end of the day. because what matters is what I'm willing to give, right? And I'm giving it from a place of love, not in a transactional way. Like, I do this for you, so then you make me feel this way. But I think that's kind of missing. And I agree with you, Michael. I think we get mixed messages all the time. I think, like, even at a very young age, um, I think I'm much older than you. But I think, like, my generation, especially, I got lots of confusing messages about, you know, caring about other people, or, focusing on myself or not focusing on myself. It was a lot of it was just really confusing.
So, talking about the roots of indecision, we look at things like poor self-esteem and fear and worrying about what other people are going to think. But what are some of the consequences of
Mm,
indecisiveness, of not being able to make decisions? I'm both on a psychological, emotional level, and the existential consequences.
that's a great question. I think definitely one consequence is just that you probably never feel at peace. You know, if you're always making decisions that are based on what you think other people might want or might approve, it's almost like you don't go through life living it authentically. You're not living your life. You're living a life that you think other people think you should live. And that could be a decision on what to make for Thanksgiving dinner, or it could be a decision on whether to move to an apartment or a home, like that basic. So I think that's a very big consequence, the feeling disconnected, and feeling again like you're not living what is actually true for you. The second piece to that, or I guess the underlying piece to that, is that you don't give yourself the space or the time to actually explore what it is that you do want, and what it is that you do believe, or what it is that you do know. Just think of it this way. If you're always thinking about what other people think, you're always worried about that, and you're jumping into other people's heads and trying to figure it out, it just means you don't spend time with yourself. You don't ask yourself what you feel, what you want, what you think is best. You know where I see this a lot? I see this a lot in dating. Like, we go on a date or something, and then, you'll spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the other person is thinking and what they're feeling. But it derails you from asking yourself those questions. What do I feel? What do I think? What do I want? And so I think that's the existential piece, is that now you're super disconnected from maybe the person that you really are, like, deeply. How do you get to know that person? Well, you have to stop. First, you have to make decisions. Like, you have to make a decision and trust that it's the decision that feels best for you. It just feels right, and just trust it. And the other thing is just being comfortable with, I think, like, when we're stuck in decision paralysis, right? Like, we don't ever really embrace the idea that other people might have thoughts about us and we'll never know them. And maybe they're not pleasant. Like, we need to be okay with that. We don't own other people's emotional space or their thoughts. Like, just being okay with, yeah, okay, I'm not for everyone. And maybe I'm okay with that because I'm for me. I like who I am.
I like that idea that you, well, I don't like the idea, but I think it's a good idea that how we become disconnected, or how a person can become disconnected from themselves by not making decisions. That friend I talked about earlier, I've asked her, well, what do you want? What do you like to do for you? And she says, like, I don't even know anymore. I'm
Yeah.
so used to trying to please everybody else. It's hard to even understand what I want out of life. Where do I want to go? And that's just, it makes me feel bad, because it is, I never put it in the terms like you just did. It's being disconnected from yourself. When you sacrifice your own values for other people over and over again, you end up not knowing what your values actually are.
I mean, again, you articulated that really well. That is exactly it. Like, how do you yeah, how do you know what you value? How do you connect with that? Like that takes time. That takes time and very intentional, like a dedication to figuring that out. But again, also being very comfortable with the fact that what you value, what you believe, what you know to be true for you may not be the same as other people. And it's important not to make meaning of that. The fact that you think different, that you have different values, that you believe in different things doesn't make you any better or any less than anybody. It's just that's just who you are. But again, I think that involves work. It involves like some serious internal work and being really comfortable with being really uncomfortable, because when I work with clients on this, the hardest thing is getting through the discomfort. It's getting through that, getting past that discomfort, or just being uncomfortable and allowing it. But I always, I tell clients this is how you build confidence in yourself. Confidence is trust in yourself. So you trust that you're going to
Yeah.
get through it. You're going to be okay. You don't need anybody to get you through it.
I was talking to my friend the other day who's still incarcerated. He was my cellmate for 11 years and
Okay.
he's my best friend. And we were talking about the idea of personal change and how, a person's upbringing influences them. And the thing that we realize, and it's not new, but we just talked about it the other day, was that he and I had sort of, it's going to sound nuts, but an unfair advantage when it comes to this.
Okay.
Ultimately, I was incarcerated for 25 years. I had the time to read book after book, to journal, to do self analysis, to sit back and think. But your average person doesn't have that kind of time and space to do that because life just keeps coming and coming. So, for the average person that's listening to this podcast or to anyone else struggling with indecision, what would you recommend? What steps can your average person take to deal with this, to overcome it?
I'm going to pause and think about that because
That's okay.
I'm like very intentional with the things I say. Um, I think the first thing is to first identify and accept that this is where you are. Like when it comes to like decision making, like first become aware, you know what, this is actually a problem for me. This is a challenge. I'm recognizing that, you know? And then the second piece to that is to then also just, it doesn't take that much time. It's just ask yourself the question, what am I afraid of at the end of the day? When it comes to making a decision, whether it's what car to buy, where to live, or what to order at TGI Fridays, whatever, like, what are you afraid of? Right? Because you can't change what you can't see necessarily. So, like, if you identify that at the end of the day, and you got to be really real with yourself, it's I'm I'm scared of what other people are going to think. I'm afraid. Okay, so you own that. All right, and then you do a little bit of work on. Okay, so I'm just going to acknowledge that I'm afraid about what other people think, and then consistently turn the question onto yourself in every scenario. What do I think? What do I feel? What is true for me? And it's a bumpy process and it's an uncomfortable process. So, like for the average person, right, with clients that I work with, I always tell them, listen, this is not an overnight. This is not an overnight process. It's not from one day to the next, you're just going to wake up and no longer consider what other people are thinking. That's just not going to happen. It's a process, but you gotta stick with it and just be very consistent and constantly catch yourself. I'm worried about what other people think, but then taking time to know yourself better and understand yourself better and have grace also for yourself. I mean, what was that like for you? It's 25 years.
Well,
Is it, I guess what I'm asking, Mike, because you said I could ask you a
you
question, so I'm
can.
going
You
to
can
ask
ask
you,
me whatever you want.
right? Because you're right? You had 25 years incarcerated and you had a lot of time to contemplate. You had a lot of time to think. And I guess, you know what I wonder, because I would imagine you were quite young when you were incarcerated. is, was it hard for you to like see yourself and accept? Or was that a
Oh,
process that was like
well,
overnight?
it is a process. And before I answer the question, let me just go a little bit aside with the idea of it being a process, because when you were talking about the idea of learning to not worry about what other people think, there's a sort of a backlash, I guess, when a person tries to change, that if you don't want to be too hard on yourself, because then, oh my God, I'm thinking about what people think about me again. I'm such a loser, because that
Oh,
just reinforces
mm.
the poor self-esteem. What I've tried to do is, if I ever get too complacent and too confident, I look to the person that I still want to be, to my areas of weakness, and I say I can't be complacent because I still have a long way to go. But if I start to beat myself up, I say to myself, well, look how far I've come. So I have two ways to sort of look at the dynamic, one looking forward, one looking back, to kind of keep me centered for where I need to go. But um so I went to prison when I was 21 years old. And initially, I couldn't care less about trying to change. It didn't make a difference to me. Then I decided to change. I moved forward a little bit. I stopped doing drugs because I'd been doing drugs in prison. And then I ultimately fell back again into my old ways. And then I have an ant that I have to kill. It's driving me nuts. I'm sorry.
Oh, a literal ant. I
Yes.
that's like a person.
No,
What?
an ant. It's too, no, it was driving me crazy. Here it is. It won't go away. All right. And hopefully he just stays on that side of the computer. He was on my screen and it was very, very distracting. So in 2004, I made the absolute decision. I was done with drugs, done gambling. I'm going to change myself. Now, that requires a brutal honesty that I don't even know if most people could handle it. I mean, it's
Sure.
just,
Mhm.
first of all, there was coming to grips with the reasons I did what I did. I wasn't the tough guy I pretended to be to the world. I was a scared coward who acted out of fear, out of insecurity, jealousy, all characteristics that people generally don't want to admit. I had to admit how did this happen? Where did it come from? What could I have done differently as a kid? I mean, I'd always blame my parents, but it's then I had to realize, well, if my life is determined by what everybody else is doing, even my parents, well, then I don't have the freedom to change. I'm always a puppet on somebody else's strings. So if I'm going to say right now I can take responsibility, I have to recognize that all along, I mean, obviously not at 4 and 5 years old, but there's a continuum of responsibility that grows as we get older. And by the time I'm, 21 years old and still committing crimes, I'm certainly responsible for my life. Now, that doesn't mean it wasn't more difficult than it would be for somebody that had two loving parents that taught them right from wrong, but it does mean that I'm responsible. And there were other kids and there's other people who have been through worse that didn't end up doing what I did. So to have to face
Wow.
all that, to
Wow.
stop the blame game,
Wow.
to take
Wow.
responsibility, to recognize my own weaknesses, my insecurities, my fear of abandonment and feelings of being unlovable. That stuff is painful
Yeah.
and it's not easy to face, but it's essential. It's like driving in a car and ignoring the check engine light. You
Yeah.
ignore it at your own peril. That's not going to fix the engine. If you want to fix it, you have to face it. So that is, I mean, that's such a sort of, I don't want to say elementary, but a surface
Mm.
level or a just touching the beginning of what the change requires. And there's a story I'd like to tell too. There was a guy when I was 21, they put a guy in my cell and he had been in prison already for 20 years. And I was talking to him and it just blew my mind that all of my life experiences that made up me, he was in
Mm.
prison for. And we were talking, and I said to him, I don't think I really belong in prison. And he looked dead in my face and said, Leibowitz, you're exactly where you need to be.
Wow.
And facing that was not easy, but it was also essential. And then he also made a challenge to me. And I said, I'd like to read the Bible, the whole Bible. And he said, well, the problem with that is you lack the mental strength to make it through. And he was right. I took it kind of as a challenge, and I ended up reading it, although not, it wasn't a smooth go through, but I did. But hearing those uncomfortable truths was necessary. My friend, the one I mentioned earlier, Brent McCall, he and I started the change process at the same time. It was such a fortuitous event that most people just don't have. We were best friends in prison. We both had the same interests, which were reading, ideas, politics, thinking, self-improvement, and we both decided at the same time. And that's like the closest thing to a miracle that I can imagine. I'm an atheist, but nonetheless, it was very fortuitous.
Mm.
And he and I would call each other out constantly, and that's not an easy thing. And no one likes to hear, "Hey, you're an asshole. You're being an asshole," but it's necessary. You just have to deal with it if you want to grow and change. So I hope that answers that first question of yours, but you feel free. You can ask me any others if you want. I'll answer anything. Don't hold back.
No, I appreciate your candor. But you hit the nail on the head though. Like honestly. Like you kind of summed up what I do as a therapist in a big way, which is try to help people. I don't change people. I don't fix people. I don't, people aren't broken, first of all. And I'm not responsible for whatever happens within the person they are. I just kind of facilitate and guide and create a space. But I think at the end of the day, what we hope for, what we strive for is for the person to see themselves, really see themselves, and also take responsibility and not stay in a place of anger and resentment for the people that hurt them or the people that did things to them. Like you touched on this, is getting out of that mindset of none of this is my fault. Like, this is everybody else's fault that I'm here, and when somebody arrives at that point is unique to them, to their journey. Not everybody arrives there. That sounds like you did, right? So when it comes to something as seemingly small, say like decision paralysis, like as a therapist, I know that the roots of that are very deep. Decision paralysis isn't just about whether to make mashed potatoes or sweet potato fry. You know what I mean? Like it's less about the actual decision that needs to be made. And it's really more about the process and the, like all of the predisposing factors that might have made somebody struggle to develop a strong sense of self. So it is, decision, something like decision paralysis and that kind of work, it takes time, it takes patience, but more than anything, it takes a decision. It really, it involves a decision. And that decision is, I want to live my life. I want to live it, authentically according to what is really true for me. So that means that I have to identify what's in the way and I have to really consciously push it aside. And I got to take responsibility for myself. I'm glad that you did that. I'm so curious about what are all the books you read and what was it like to read the Holy Bible? Oh my goodness.
I've read the Bible probably 3 times, and I've also done
Come on.
Bible studies. Yeah.
Hmm.
As far as what your interest is, psychology, I've read, well, Stanton Samanow, the criminal psychologist, Glenn Walters, the criminal psychologist, but I've also read Freud, Adler, Jung,
Mm,
Albert Ellis, Aaron Beck, Abraham Maslow, Carl Rogers,
yeah.
David Burns. Trying to think of somebody else that might be of interest to you. A whole host of
Yeah.
self-improvement books, from As a Man Thinketh, Think and Grow Rich, that kind of thing. Nathaniel Branden, I'm a big fan of his teachings in psychology. A lot of philosophy, economics, and politics too. I mean, it was there quite some time, so there was the opportunity to read a
A
lot.
lot of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So all those types of things. My mind's going blank now. Of course, I can't think of any others,
Of course, when somebody asks
but
you, what's the last book you read? Can't remember.
well, the last book I read was Murray Rothbard's "What Has the Government Done to Our Money." I finished that yesterday. That's an
Okay.
easy one to remember. Do you have any other questions for me? I'd be happy to answer.
Um, I guess what? Do you still sometimes struggle, like
Yes.
with decision paralysis or
Um,
or with
there's
just like worrying
Decision
about?
paralysis, no.
Mm,
There is a dynamic though, is I'm apathetic about a lot of things. I just don't care. Like if somebody says, where are we gonna go eat? I don't care. You know what I mean? So
hmm,
like I'm with people and they all care. So this type of thing drives me crazy. They'll tell me, "Will you pick a place?" Well, I could put a menu, or not a menu, but a list of restaurants on the wall, throw a dart and hit it and say, "Let's go there." I don't care. But then somebody, "Oh, I don't want to go to that place." Well, then you pick the place, because it doesn't bother me. I don't care. So in that regard, no. There is though a dynamic that getting out of prison, I went to prison so young that I don't really have any interests for doing social things.
okay.
And that makes it difficult to decide what to do
Mm,
because I was away so long. I mean, what I used to do, I can't really do anymore. I'm not going to go get drunk. I'm not going to do drugs. So figuring out a sort of set of social activities has been difficult, but I don't know that that's indecisiveness as much
mm,
as it's just not knowing.
yeah, no, that doesn't sound like into like decision paralysis. It's more kind of exploring or like you said, like not knowing, not knowing what you might be interested in. That's not all of these other things,
Yeah.
you know. I want to ask you another question if you don't mind. Like,
Shoot.
because you brought this up, like I think something that I've seen and experienced too is that when we grow up overly concerned with other people's perception of us, to a point where everything that we do revolves around pleasing others and living up to what we think are other people's expectations. And suddenly we start to work on ourselves and realize that we don't want that for ourselves anymore. What I've seen is it's almost like a person goes from one end of the spectrum all the way to the other, where it's almost hostile and and not necessarily like aggressive, but kind of like that. Well, I don't give I don't give a crap what anybody thinks, and almost like I've watched people like isolate themselves so much, almost like to prove a point that they don't care
Yeah.
what other people think. Did you feel like that was your experience, or have you
Not
witnessed
from
that?
not for myself, but I've seen what you're talking about. The problem is in relation to me there's such an intermingling of values that go into this, and it's who, like for instance, what type of people do you care what they think about you? Obviously, growing up, I didn't care what the law-abiding citizens thought about me because I was doing all kinds of bad things. So my values of being a tough guy, of being a violent person, that's what I wanted other people to think of me, as a dangerous person. I liked when people feared me. So once when I start to change, and now you're in prison where people will say things to you, and then it's like, and that's where they judge you on that, along that sort of spectrum. And to allow people to talk to me in ways that I previously didn't, or say things about me behind my back that I never would have allowed in the past, that was difficult.
Hmm,
So in those regards, I had to not respond violently, not to respond anger, and learn to be assertive rather than aggressive. And as that applies to the case you're talking about, I'd imagine it's a similar thing where you have to learn to, it's okay to speak your wants and your likes rather than just doing what everybody else wants, but that doesn't mean other people have to cater to you either. So I
sure,
can tell somebody
sure,
assertively, can you please not talk to me in that way? I don't talk to you like that, but I can't make them do it.
right,
And so, and that's sort of the letting go of the control and understanding, do what I need to do, I think would be the best sort of way to put it. And by the way, that happens to me
yeah,
still. I mean, I'm very active on social media because this is the career I've chosen. Ultimately, I go on social media to promote this.
yeah.
I don't really care for it, but I understand I have to do it. But people will say downright awful things to me on
Oh,
social media.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
And to not, and I can't, I have to be hypersensitive to what I say, because then they just say, oh, look, he's threatening us. He's getting angry. So people, I mean, I have people call me a Jew. I mean, and all kinds of things. And there's a big part of me, to be honest, that would like to really lean into such
Let them have
people,
it.
but
Yeah.
but I can't. And ultimately, my vindication, and I've told them, because they'll talk about my criminal history. And I've told the guy, ultimately, you know what you're saying about me is not true. Because if you really thought I was the same violent person I was when I was 21, you would never speak to me that way. You're
Mm,
speaking to me that way because you know I'm going to let it go. And
mm,
that to me is validation. It tells me that yes, I have changed to the point where people know they can get away with talking to me like that. And do I
wow.
love it? No. Sometimes, and there's times I'm just not in the mood for it, and I'll just tell them, look,
Yeah,
fuck off.
sure.
Normally I
Sure.
don't, but there's time. Like if I'm aggravated about something else
Mm,
and I come across that stuff,
mm,
it
mm,
makes it more difficult to just
mm-hmm.
be the calm, peaceful guy that's just moves on. But I do it nonetheless. I don't. I'm not going to respond violently. But there was a time when it would drive me crazy where I would think, "Oh God, this person's saying this to me on social media. What's everybody else out there thinking?"
Right.
You
Right.
know,
Uh,
but it's ultimately irrelevant what they're thinking. It doesn't matter.
yeah. Yeah. But that, Michael, that is testament to how much you grew, evolved, how much you know yourself really well. And I love that oh my God, I love that you already know ahead of time. Maybe if you're bothered about something else, it makes you're a little vulnerable, right? And so that when somebody says something horrible, it's going to land a little different because you're already in that space
Sure.
where you're not feeling your good. But oh my God, if everybody had that kind of insight and awareness of themselves, we'd live in a different world. We would live in a completely different world.
I,
So thank you for sharing
I
that with
agree
me.
with you. You're
I feel
very
like I
welcome.
need to start a podcast and then have you on as a
Oh,
guest.
please do. Please do. I would love it. I would love it. Well, do you
Yeah,
have anything else you think that we need to cover in relation to indecisiveness, or do you think we've covered it adequately?
I think we've covered it.
All right,
Yeah.
that's great. Where can people find you? Like I found you on Psychology Today's website.
Um, I mean, Google search is it's gonna bring up a bunch of stuff. I'm in Greater Boston. I'm a therapist and a public speaker, and I also work at Boston College, not just as a professor. I'm the director of community-based initiatives. So yeah, I mean, I have a website. It's soulfuerza.com. And yeah, if somebody wants to reach out, they can reach out to me
How
via the
would you spell
website.
that?
Soul as in Soul,
Okay.
and then fuerza is Fuerza.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's like soul strength.
Soul
Yeah.
strength. Yeah, soul strength.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had to throw in the Latino thing in
No, no, it's fine, but I just
there.
want to make sure people know where to go. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Heck you. Thank you, Michael. And I wish you luck and look out for that invitation to my podcast
Yeah,
someday.
I will. I will. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
You too. For now, this is the
Bye.
Rational Egoist signing out. I'm Michael Liebowitz. Till next time.